Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. From its beginning, CMC has welcomed everyone. I'm Kristen Easterday, Director of Communications and Public Affairs with the Columbus Regional Airport Authority, and I'm also a board member with CMC. Today's forum is sponsored by Hannah News Service, and today's forum partners are the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus and NBC4. Our live stream is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and NBC4i. Let's thank all of those supporting today's forum. So it's our honor today to welcome the Democratic candidates running for Ohio governor. Today's speakers will face each other at the Democratic primary on May 3rd. The winner will appear on the November ballot alongside a Republican opponent. Audience question for today's forum must be submitted in writing on the cards that are found at your tables. Please print your question and your name on the card, and a member of CMC's program committee will come around to collect the cards and will ask the question on your behalf. We're excited for a great conversation about the future of the Buckeye State and today's speakers. So please help me welcome John Cranley, former mayor of Cincinnati. Nan Whaley, former mayor of Dayton. And our amazing host, Colleen Marshall. You can learn more about today's speakers in your forum flyer. So Colleen, we look forward to today's conversation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin, I do want to let you know that we've agreed to some guidelines for the program today. It's not going to be your typical debate. It's more of a comfortable discussion. There will be no formal timekeeping as a result, but I will allow each candidate to express their thoughts. I'll give both candidates similar questions. Some of them may be targeted just to them. And I will also try to give each candidate about the same amount of time to answer questions. The candidates have agreed that they may not question each other. I'll be the one asking the questions. Got it, everybody? So we also ask that you hold your applause to the end today because we want to keep the cheers and demonstrations down so that we can get to as many questions as we possibly can. So I'm going to start with a softball and give each of you the opportunity to say, as a big city mayor here in Ohio, who've been in politics a few years, what is it in your background that you believe has prepared you to run this entire state? And I will just start with you, Ms. Whaley.
Thank you, Colleen. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and really grateful for the Columbus Metro Club for putting this together. I remember I got to speak to you all a few years ago after the Dayton shooting in 2019. You were incredibly gracious and incredibly friendly and really a great discourse that we got to have. So thank you all for having me here today. Look, I have been really honored to be the mayor of Dayton for the past 8 years and past president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. It's a great job. You get to be visionary, but at the same time, you have to deal with the things on the ground that are so important. And frankly, you don't have the luxury of saying, that's not my problem. And for the past, particularly in 2019, I felt that firsthand in the course of 10 weeks where we experienced KKK rally that came to our town from out of state. 48 hours later, 15 tornadoes that ripped through our center city. And 10 weeks later, a senseless mass shooting that killed 9 people and injured 27 more in the course of 32 seconds. Look, the day after the shooting, Mike DeWine came to our community to speak at the vigil. And the people of Dayton shouted in frustration, do something. Do something. Well, as mayor, I learned how to do something. And as governor, I intend to do something too. That's the kind of leadership we need. And frankly, we're not getting it from the State House, where we've had 3 decades of the same guys in charge, where they've gotten richer and families like mine have gotten further behind. Ohio simply deserves better.
All right, thank you, Ms. Whaley.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Brad, do not make me come down there. We're going to go now to Mr. Cranley. What is it in your background that you believe has prepared you to run the state?
Being the mayor of Cincinnati was my greatest honor. Co-founding the Ohio Innocence Project, which got innocent people out of prison, is my maybe the greatest professional accomplishment. In both cases, we had to overcome big odds. Cincinnati is the only city in Ohio of 100,000 or more that was ever in decline, like most of Ohio outside of Columbus, and is now rising again. We grew twice as fast as the state of Ohio. My record is better than Mike DeWine's Ohio. We reduced poverty 1.5 times faster than the state of Ohio. My record is better than Mike DeWine's. Now, how do we do this? How do we take a city like so many cities in the Midwest that was in decline and to start growing again? In short, we didn't talk about democratic ideals. We put democratic ideals into practice. Cincinnati has been the leader on police community relations in this country. In fact, after the murder of George Floyd, I helped write a report for the U.S. Conference of Mayors on police reform in Cincinnati. 22 years ago, our city, when I was a young city councilman, was subject to a boycott by civil rights leaders. Now those same civil rights leaders think this mayor of Cincinnati should be governor of Ohio because over 20 years, we built true community-oriented policing. Shootings are down, but arrest and incarceration are down over 20 years by 50% annually. We've made our city safer by arresting fewer people. These are democratic ideals. I'm the only mayor that I know of that put a $15 living wage law into place. Along with Columbus, we became the first city in Ohio to get a 100% score from the Human Rights Campaign. I built the largest solar farm ever built in this country by a city. The city of Cincinnati government services are carbon neutral. And we doubled public transit in Hamilton County under my leadership, and I helped lead an effort to expand preschool. Investing in diversity and inclusion, treating people more fairly, not perfectly, but more fairly, investing in infrastructure, education, clean energy. These are our ideals as Democrats. And guess what? They work. Mike DeWine's trickle-down economics and corruption have shrunk the middle class in Ohio. My middle class is getting bigger. And I believe if we're going to beat Mike DeWine, we have to have a candidate whose record is better than Ohio's, not worse. And I'm the only candidate in this race who can credibly say that we can do better. The fact is that wages are rising in Cincinnati. Poverty is falling, all faster than the state of Ohio. And that's why Teresa and I are ready to lead this state based on our record and our plans for the future.
You've made a cornerstone of your campaign to be marijuana, legalizing it and taxing it in the state recreationally. Realistically, there's a lot of skepticism about the numbers that you have released, about the amount of money that would generate. And also realistically, you have to get this passed somehow in this state, in this conservative legislature. What is your specific plan to make all that happen?
Thanks, Colleen, and I'm excited about getting this done. Happy 420, by the way. Teresa and I are the first campaign to really lean into this. I even ran an ad calling for this. We need change. You know, having run the Ohio Innocence Project, I know that there are deep issues with the criminal justice system, and decriminalizing and legalizing marijuana is part of stopping people from ruining their careers over something that should not ruin your career over. Look, Michigan is collecting $280 million from an excise tax. These are facts. Everyone that's looked at my plan has said that on a per capita basis, we should get not only $350 million once fully implemented, but in Michigan, they're only counting the tax at the source of growth. We would also get new sales taxes. That's going to be over $500 million minimum, maybe much higher. But in addition to that, we also have, as governor, control of Jobs Ohio, which is way too secretive, and I intend to bring sunshine into that. But the governor controls about $330 million in excess cash flow with control of that organization, and the state has $120 million in cash capital for Wi-Fi expansion. My point is this, that Teresa and I are going to guarantee 30,000 jobs are created annually that pay a minimum of $60,000 to get high-speed Wi-Fi across the state. With remote learning, remote education, for small towns to have a chance to get a comeback, they need access to the economy. Cell phone coverage for the whole state, clean water, clean energy, advanced manufacturing, and fix our roads and bridges. We will borrow $8 billion over 4 years to do those infrastructure investments. And between marijuana, the cash capital from high-speed Wi-Fi, as well as control of Jobs Ohio, is well more than enough to pay for that debt service to build that infrastructure. Thank you so much for your question.
I understand, Ms. Whaley, you've also said, in fact, you said in an interview with me, you would support legalizing and taxing marijuana. Do you have a specific plan for how that would work?
Well, certainly I think it's time to legalize marijuana. The majority of the states in the country are, and we need to make sure that Ohio's getting its fair share of tax revenue from this. I think the state to the north of us, Michigan, has done a pretty good job of this, and I just don't think it's a magic bean or a silver bullet that's going to save Ohio's economy. If that's the case, Michigan would be doing a lot better and would not have to pay any of the taxes that they have to keep on going. So we need to get this done. It needs to happen. We need to have our fair share of resources. And then we also need to make sure that we expunge records of anyone that's been with a marijuana conviction. And then finally, when we do it, we need to make sure we have equity in mind. What we know about marijuana not being legal is it's disproportionately affected the African American community, and so we need to make sure when we are rolling this out that the entrepreneurs have an equitable lens, so we have African Americans that are really getting to lead and win in marijuana legalization.
Redistricting, I think we can all agree right now in this state is a train wreck.
Understatement, Colleen.
We know,
Yeah.
we know it's now in 2 courts. The federal court was taking it up today. We know voters have twice gone to the polls and said they wanted a fair process. That is not working. We know all of that. So what would you, I'll start with you on this question, what would you recommend we do differently so that we don't have this problem when the maps come up again in 4 years?
Well, I mean, I agree with Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. She's in her, I think, either in her first or second kickback of the Supreme Court. She said we need to go back to the ballot. You know, the challenge is that the politicians, the Republican politicians at the State House, want to pick their voters rather than having the voters pick them, and that makes our politics so much more radical and extreme when the decisions are made in primaries rather than generals. It affects how we're getting governed by such an extreme nature at the State House. So, you know, look, I'm still hopeful that, you know, we will get fair districts. That's all 73% of Ohioans are asking for. You know, I'm hopeful that will happen. But regardless, we got to go back to the ballot box. And I think it will pass considering how embarrassing this has been for Ohioans and how Ohioans are so firmly for getting better districts.
But go back to the ballot box with what? Do
Well,
we
she
take
gave-
state lawmakers out of the process?
Yes, she gave some really good recommendations, particularly on taking politicians out of the process. Many states have nonpartisan efforts for redistricting, and it's worked. And that works, you know, whether it's in a blue state or a purple state or a red state. And I think that's what we have to do. Clearly, they don't have the ability to hold the pen, and so we have to take them out of the process.
And what do you think about the redistricting process? What's our solution here?
Well, Mike DeWine violated his oath. I will not. I will follow the Constitution. But the bigger point is this. No matter what the maps turn out to be, Democrats have to win. We keep losing more and more of the state, and yet the state is shrinking economically. Teresa and I have a fresh, new agenda that's never been tried before. We've got to try different things to improve the quality of life of the people of Ohio. That's why we're going to fully fund K-12 education for the first time since the DeRolf decision. We're going to provide summer school to help kids who lost learning during COVID. We're going to guarantee jobs that pay $60,000, $30,000 of them annually. We're going to legalize marijuana, and then we're going to do something that's been done in Republican states like Alaska and North Dakota. We're going to provide a dividend of $500 per family, up to $75,000 worth of household income from the existing production of natural gas in Ohio. You know, the Republicans are corrupt, and they raised our monthly energy bill to bail out a coal company in Indiana. Teresa and I are going to give people a dividend. Think about that messaging if Democrats are ever going to win again in this state. They raise your monthly bills, we give you a dividend. Which is better for you and your family? These are the kinds of choices we need, no matter what the maps look like, and they can't gerrymander the state of Ohio. We got to get a majority of the votes by having new, fresh ideas that are relevant to people's lives.
Well, you brought up the House Bill 6 scandal. This next question will go to you, Ms. Whaley. You've been highly critical, as has Mr. Cranley, of the bribery scandal at the State House and the dark money system that allowed that to happen. You were a paid fundraiser for Ohio Progressive Collaborative. They have declined to identify the source of their funding. They have not been transparent, and they are, in fact, a dark money organization. So how do you explain what appears to be a conflict in what you were saying about dark money and your history of working with a dark money group?
Well, let's compare what First Energy did to the Ohio Progressive Collaborative first. First Energy created a super PAC to bribe Mike DeWine and fund his campaign so they could get $1 billion bailout. The Ohio Progressive Collaborative funds people to register to vote, to make sure people can actually just vote, to protect environmental access. And I'm proud of that work. It is very, very different. There are C3s and C4s. Many of you probably work in them in this room, all across the state of Ohio. Mayor Cranley and I started one with the Ohio Mayor's Alliance, which is also a C4 and a C3. So these are tax entities, not necessarily dark money groups. When they become places to break the law, to make the FBI call the state the most corrupt state house in the country, that is very, very different. I'm proud of the work I did to make sure people had access to the ballot box and to fund that work.
But should you not be transparent about, if you're talking about transparency with these groups, it's what lays the table for what happened with the dark money.
We absolutely need to change the law.
So my question is, did you solicit, or did the group solicit funding from First Energy, from AEP, from other utilities? And is that not exactly what happened that led, the same kind of non-transparency? And why not reveal where the money came from?
Look, the first thing I did when I announced I was running for governor was to say we need to have an anti-corruption plan to make sure that we're not the most corrupt state house in the country. And one of that is disclosing all the funding that is all across the state right now. That's not the law right now. Kathleen Clyde has recommended that, has introduced bills on that. Allison Russo. When that happens, which I would fight for that to happen, that would definitely be the best way to go. But we cannot fight one hand behind our back when they're trying to suppress voters, when they're trying to make sure that we don't have fair districts, when they're trying to make sure that we don't have clean energy and clean water. We have to take the fight at where it's at, and we've got to win to change the laws so this can't happen again.
All right, and I will ask you, this next question is for you, Mr. Cranley. There are a number of women's organizations and abortion pro-choice groups who are very concerned about your candidacy. In fact, Emily's list has said, and I'm going to read from their release, for most of his career, John Cranley has been vocal about his anti-abortion beliefs. Now that he recognizes the unpopularity of his views, Cranley is seeking to gloss over his prior anti-abortion statements with the hope that Ohio voters will forget about the past. They are concerned that if you are in the governor's office, and we have a legislature that is as conservative as it is today, passing some of the most restrictive abortion laws in the state, you will not veto those pieces of legislation. What do you say to these women's groups who have concern that you aren't being forthright about your true feelings about abortion?
Thank you for the question. I am pro-choice. My Lieutenant Governor, Teresa Feder, is pro-choice, and we will defend reproductive freedom in the state and veto any effort to undermine it. It is true, and I believe in transparency, and my record is clear, that I started out in a different place. I was raised Catholic, and I started out my career in a different place. I've changed. And that change had to do with personal issues that my wife and I dealt with over 15 years ago as we started a family. The fact is that we had to make some very personal, private fertility decisions. And in the context of doing that, my wife convinced me what she already believed, which is that government should not be involved in these decisions. It worked out for us. My son, Joseph, turned 13 yesterday. But I have been pro-choice ever since, and I will be a pro-choice governor. But I welcome the transparency and the evolution, and I do believe that we have to have an accounting of any income that we received from a dark money group, especially when HB 6 is the biggest issue facing this general election. And I know that Teresa and I have not received any income personally from a dark money group, and I think there has to be accounting for that if we're going to beat Mike DeWine in November, because winning on that issue is obviously critical. And we have a plan to not just stop the corruption, but to offer a dividend. They raised our bills. We'll give you a dividend back.
I'd like to give you a minute to maybe respond not only to that, but to the abortion question. You have been pro-choice, I believe, through most of your career.
Correct. Yes, Colleen. I think it's a really personal issue for me as a woman. I've been on the front lines of protecting abortion access, both all across the state, particularly in Cincinnati and Dayton. And we're glad that Mayor Cranley has come to the fold a few months before he announced running for governor. If that was the case, that he was pro-choice so long ago, I wish he was on the front lines with us when we were trying to fight to save the Cincinnati clinic. We could have used his help. But this is a super key issue, and Roe is going to fall. We know that's going to happen, and we need someone that's going to be unequivocal in the governor's seat to protect it. That's why I think every single group that's a pro-choice advocate, from Planned Parenthood to Pro-Choice Ohio, have endorsed me for this effort, because we need to have someone that will veto every bill without a problem, will be proactive in working with choice groups so we can fight for access, because this is going to be a fight that is state by state now, and we need a leader on this issue in the governor's seat, not someone passive.
You touched earlier on the mass shooting that happened in your city, and at that time, Governor DeWine did stand shoulder to shoulder with you, and he pledged something would be done about the gun and gun violence issue that we have in this state. He did not manage to hold back what the legislature wanted to push through. In fact, after he made those statements, this state took away the requirement for anybody to have training to carry a gun. So my question is, if this Republican governor couldn't make changes in the gun laws in Ohio, how do you think you can make changes in the gun laws in Ohio?
Well, I think what we've seen with Governor DeWine is he's too weak to stand up to the extremists in his party. We've seen this in common sense gun legislation. When he said days after the Dayton shooting he would do something, never in my worst nightmare that I think he would do something to make it worse, like signing Stand Your Ground and permitless concealed carry, making our communities all across the state of Ohio less safe. But we've seen his weakness when it comes to a myriad of issues: redistricting, COVID pandemic, gun safety. He does what is politically convenient in the moment, says what can get a story that we say, oh, that makes sense, and then immediately falls to the extremists in his party. Now look, I have a reputation of being a fighter, someone that says what I believe and takes action with it, willing to bring both parties to the table to build consensus and compromise and to grow our state. We've had to do that in Dayton. We don't have any other partners to do it with, and so that's what we've done, and I'm proud of that work. We haven't seen it, we need a real fighter in the governor's seat, not someone that is afraid of his shadow and certainly afraid of the extremists in his party.
I'll ask you a similar question. We have seen the state become very conservative with the legislature as it is right now. At the best case scenario, the absolute best case scenario for redistricting is a 54% majority for Republicans. It's unlikely it will get to that. So how do you, if you would become a Democratic governor, work on issues like gun control, like some of the issues that are important to your party in a legislature that really has no mind to compromise on these issues?
I will never compromise individual rights, human rights, and I will veto efforts to undermine those. The fact that Mike DeWine signed permitless carry after the police and the FOP said it would lead to dead cops, he has said open season on the cops. See, we've got to win. And they attack Democrats as being soft on law enforcement. They are soft on law enforcement. They have cut local funding, which is primarily for police and fire. They have defunded the police, not us. And I welcome that fight because we got to win. And at the same time, I have a very well-documented history of working in a bipartisan fashion, when possible, to get things done. I even convinced very conservative state reps Bill Seitz and Tom Brinkman to support a tax increase for public transit in Hamilton County. As mayor, I always had a divided council between Democrats and Republicans, and all of my major accomplishments and budgets in getting the city to grow again were bipartisan accomplishments. It is also the case that I purposely picked an agenda that I believe has bipartisan support. K through 12 education, summer school for kids who lost learning during COVID, guaranteed jobs to build high-speed Wi-Fi across the state, cell phone coverage. Rural and small-town Ohio have the worst cell phone coverage. Those are areas represented by Republicans. Their constituents need this. We all need this. Marijuana is moving. There are now Republicans introducing it. Every Democrat's for it. And yet, Mike DeWine has said he would veto it. Again, choice. Mike DeWine thinks it should be a crime. I think it should be a business. These are choices that we can decide this election on. But I know that the majority of Americans and Ohioans now support legalized marijuana. And so if we carry every Democrat and we get a few Republicans, we can pass it because it's not subject to a veto when I'm governor. But if we fail, we'll take it to the voters. Now, the dividend, a $500 dividend from energy like they have in Alaska, like they have in North Dakota, under Republicans. I know that's going to be a change of pace for the Republicans in this state because they're used to taking money from us and giving it to the special interest, which is essentially what HB 6 has done, that's essentially what their corruption tax has done, essentially what their gas tax that they refuse to budge on during high inflation right now. So that'll be a change of pace. But if it's good enough for the Republicans in Alaska and North Dakota, why isn't it good enough here? And with inflation and gas prices and food, we need a populist agenda that will lift the wages of the people of Ohio. And I think that's the best way to win. And fundamentally, this whole discussion is about who can beat Mike DeWine. And Teresa and I have both the record and a new set of fresh ideas that I believe give us our best chance of winning in November.
One thing you touched on earlier is that there are parts of this state that are thriving and parts of this state that continue to suffer and see economic decline. And one of the areas that you can see stark inequities is in education. Even though 2 decades ago, the Ohio Supreme Court ordered that the funding crisis for schools in Ohio be changed, that somehow the legislature had to do something. If you would go, for example, into Dublin-Jerome High School here in Central Ohio, 99% graduation rate and opportunities that kids in Appalachian Ohio could never dream of. So as governor, what would you do to try to solve not only the funding crisis, but the inequities and opportunities for Ohio students?
Thank you. There's a lot to unpack there. First of all, fundamentally, states are either growing or dying. And most of all, Ohio is in decline. But Cincinnati was also in decline and is rising again. So I have the track record to bring hope to the rest of the state. Second, Teresa is probably the leading champion of public education as a public educator herself. And we have promised in the first 100 days that we would fully fund constitutional education for the first time since DeRolf. We're only $1.5 billion away in a $70 billion budget to getting it full and fair funded. And we will do it as a standalone budget because that's not negotiable with everything else. We will also, as I mentioned, provide rigorous summer school opportunities for families who lost learning during COVID. But it's also the case that we've got to take economic growth to Appalachia as we have in Cincinnati. But specifically, we also need to deal with the mental health and the medical services that these communities need. You know, Governor Rhodes famously said he would put an airport in every county. Teresa and I are promising to put a federally qualified health center, primary care doctor center in every county in Ohio. There are 88 counties in Ohio. 47 don't have a single federally qualified health center that provides primary care, mental health care, dental care, addiction care. The people of Appalachia and so many parts of our state need those services. They were shut down and made you drive to hospitals. We're going to bring medical services back. But the other issue, which I've mentioned before, which is the biggest opportunity for rural and small-town Ohio to access the economy, is to take high-speed Wi-Fi to them so they can enjoy their choice to live in a small town and rural area and not lose out on access to the economy. This is how we grow all corners of the state.
And I'll ask you the same question. We are seeing such an inequity in the educational opportunities for students. I'm from Appalachia. The students there don't have a clue with what's going on in some of the wealthy districts right here in central Ohio. So how would you solve that problem?
Yeah, Colleen, you're right. No matter what community you live in Ohio, you deserve to have a quality education with opportunities, and we don't see that in the state. You know, look, I've traveled to all 88 counties. I'm proud to see all across the pride of the state, and that everyone does deserve better than what they're getting. And what we saw 20 years ago is a state house under John Husted that had this failed policy idea that if they cut taxes on the wealthy and big corporations, that suddenly every community would grow. It has not worked. I would not be running for governor if that were the case. We also saw from John Husted, in Dayton particularly, this idea that if they privatized public education, that suddenly that would be great for our schools too. And Dayton was an experiment for the state on charters of unregulated charters and basically the privatization of state schools. Before Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, Dayton actually led the country in the number of kids in charters while they continued to get further and further behind. So, you know, as governor, we'll make sure that we fully fund the DeRolf, and I think they made a small, good step with the Sweeney Cup bill this past cycle, and then they immediately announced the backpack bill, which provides vouchers all across the state, which is a straight privatization of our public education, which will affect our property tax rates, et cetera, making it more expensive. Right? So fighting back the privatization of public education is key. And then finally, like in Dayton, we provided high-quality preschool for every 3- and 4-year-old. We noticed that a lot of these kids in urban areas and in rural areas come to kindergarten behind. Childcare is a key opportunity to that. We've seen in Dayton it works. When kids start kindergarten ready, they're able to get to the 3rd grade reading guarantee and then be able to move. So putting more of that service and that opportunity, both for parents and families, will make a big deal. But we've got to get past this idea that if we keep cutting taxes for the very rich, that somehow all our communities are going to work out. It is a failed policy, and we've seen the inequity across the state get worse, not better.
We have seen Governor DeWine and Lieutenant Governor Husted take quite a bit of credit for an economic development project that's coming from Intel that does promise to be transformative, especially for Central Ohio. A company making $100 million worth, billions, $500 million worth of investments in Central Ohio, promising support jobs. When voters look at that, shouldn't they say, these are two people who know what to do with economic development and they deserve another 4 years? What would you say to those voters?
Well, they know how to make the fastest growing part of the state even richer. But what about the rest of the state? The rest of the state needs a comeback. And I'm the only person in this race that's delivered a comeback. And the fact is the corporate welfare model isn't sustainable, isn't replicable. Because they're bringing, and look, of course we're happy that Intel's coming and bringing jobs to Ohio, but they're taking money from me in Cincinnati and Nan and Dayton and people in Cleveland and Steubenville and Youngstown and Toledo to provide humongous corporate welfare benefits to a company here in the fastest growing part of the state. And by the way, eventually they're going to run out of our money. How are you going to get the next company in? You know, the fact is that Cincinnati's growing because we invested in diversity and inclusion and a $15 living wage and preschool and clean energy. And guess what? Everybody's doing better. Poverty's down. If we want to democratize and spread opportunity, so you don't have to do as Nana said, I agree with her. You shouldn't have to move to Columbus to have economic hope in the state. I love that line. We need to get high-speed Wi-Fi across the state. We need to get clean water across the state. We need fully funded K-12 education across the state. Look, the Republicans love to quote Reagan. Are you better off today than when the other guy took over? As he's famously said in 1980. The average Ohioan is worse off since Mike DeWine took office and started running the state in the years shortly after Nan and I were born.
I'm still younger than you, John.
As you never stop reminding me, she is younger. The average Cincinnatian is better off Mike DeWine and the Republicans have driven the middle class and shrunk it in every part of this state because their divisive social policies, their trickle-down economics, and their corruption has weakened the middle class. We need a new way forward. And corporate welfare is not the way forward. Education, upgrading our research and development institutions at our state universities and major hospitals, K through 12 education, summer school. This is how we democratize opportunity. And I'm not just saying this on an academic basis. This is what we did in Cincinnati. It works because not only are democratic ideals better morally, they're better economically. And we have the proof in Cincinnati that that's the case. And we can bring that same kind of growth to the rest of the state.
Before I move on, yes or no, do you think the Intel project was a mistake?
To my statement earlier about the great Louis Brandeis Democrats about transparency, we need to see all the details. Of course, I'm glad to see billions of dollars being invested in Ohio in jobs, but at what cost? Are they going to take money from education? Are they going to take money from, how much money are they going to take from Cincinnati and Toledo? How much money? They still haven't fully explained to the public exactly what the bill is for taxpayers. So, in the abstract, of course I'm happy those jobs are coming here, but at what price? And I don't believe, similar to all their corruption and similar to all their shady dealings with HB6, et cetera, I don't trust them. So I'd like to know the facts, but I certainly hope Intel comes and I hope they bring those jobs.
I do want to remind everyone that they are gathering questions. They've been doing that. If you have any, we're going to get to audience questions here in just a few minutes. But I want to ask you the same thing about the Intel project. It looks as if, to many people, this is a transformative project that will bring billions of dollars of investment and thousands of jobs to Ohio. So shouldn't Mike DeWine and John Husted be taking credit for this massive economic development project?
Well, Colleen, we've never seen a ribbon cutting that Mike DeWine doesn't like, so I'm sure he will definitely be there for the cutting of the schmaltzy ribbon, which he was. The challenge is we've seen now that Ohio is a partner with Intel, with $2 billion of investment into this company. We are now invested in Intel. And so we need more transparency to make sure that this deal is a good deal, right? Not only that the good-paying jobs that build Intel happen, but that the jobs that clean the building happen, that they're good-paying. What are we getting out of it as investors in Intel? And the transparency has been pretty loathsome. The other point is true. This metro that we're in is the fast-growing metro of the region. We cannot say to young people across the state that if you want to stay in Ohio and not move to the coast, you got to move to Columbus. We have to have investment across the entire state. That's why on our jobs plan, we talk about investing in small business, because whether you're in Portsmouth or Columbus, that helps all boats rise. Making sure we invest in renewable technologies like renewable energy. Having a renewable energy portfolio would be a good start. Michigan and Pennsylvania are eating our lunch when it comes to building the solar panels and wind turbines, which should be built here. So we need to have those opportunities, because when Intel announced, while Mayor Genther in the Columbus region was super excited, I have to say in every single other metro, a local leader said, "Where's mine?" And actually in Toledo and in Northwest Ohio, they knew where theirs were. When, a couple months before, Mike DeWine made the ribbon cutting for the Peloton announcement that was supposed to be 2,000 jobs in Wood County. The same week that Intel was announced in the Columbus Metro, they announced that deal wasn't happening. But Mike DeWine didn't care because he already got his photo op. The details of how these jobs are going to be and making sure that we get our $2 billion worth in the state is very, very important.
We are seeing on a national level inflation at record numbers, and we are seeing the popularity of Joe Biden be at record lows. There are predictions that Republicans will have a bloodbath in November, and that always trickles down the ballot, when not just the federal elections, but it trickles down. What do each of you say to voters about what is happening nationally and how that might be different if you took over? I'll start with you on this one.
Well, as I've traveled the 88 counties, I see that people are frustrated for being forgotten and ignored, and they should be. And they should be, particularly to the Columbus State House, which for 3 decades has had the same guys running the place. We've fallen further behind, working families have fallen further behind, and they're getting richer. So I don't think it's necessarily a party issue. I think it's an incumbency issue for sure. And they have an answer. They can throw these guys out that have been taking care of themselves for the past 3 decades at this State House. And I think that they're frustrated with them. You can see, just in this race, how tough of a time the sitting governor is having, spending nearly $6 million on a primary, a sitting governor. They are frustrated, and they should be. That's why Cheryl Stevens and I have a plan to move our community forward. We want pay to go up and bills to go down, but we got to clean up the corruption that we see at the State House. People are receptive to that, and we see people are hungry for change, and I think that's a big opportunity for this governor's race.
Mr. Cranley, I'll ask you the same question.
This is why I'm best situated to beat Mike DeWine. Mike DeWine has never met a regressive tax he didn't hike. Within a couple months, he raised the gas tax and refuses to even temporarily rescind it with inflation. He shepherded the most corrupt bill in the history of the state, which is a corruption tax, and they still haven't fully repealed it. In my city, I lowered income taxes. Who do you want going into November? Somebody who raised taxes, Mike DeWine, in the heart of great inflation, or someone who's lowered taxes? I've got the credibility to say, you are refusing to help the middle class. But beyond that, Teresa and I have a plan to give people $500 a year from natural gas, like they do in Alaska, like they do in North Dakota. I didn't invent this idea. Republicans do it in those other states. If you're making $20,000 a year, if you're making $30,000 a year, $500 can be life-changing. If you have to use your car to get to work and your tire breaks, you could lose your job and cycle into poverty. But $500 could help replace that tire. This will reduce poverty, build up the wages of the people in this state. These are new, fresh ideas. Mike DeWine's ideas are to raise regressive taxes that nickel and dime the middle class. Our plan is to lower the tax burden on the middle class and give people a dividend. I think that's a message we Democrats want to go into November with.
Before we get to the questions from the audience, I have one last question for you. We did a poll recently with Emerson College that found that 50% of Democratic voters were still undecided. The two of you were split fairly evenly, but a lot of the people who were polled really don't know much about you. Neither one of you have a driving state presence. So how do you not only get over that in this election, but how do you head into November, possibly against one of the most well-known politicians who ever was on a ballot, who's been on ballots for nearly 50 years in Ohio? And I will start with you. How do you get beyond this lack of recognition?
Well, those of you out there who agree with me can give money to my campaign. Yeah, it's a big problem that neither one of us are well known in a state as big as Ohio. However, the good news is Mike DeWine is known, and his record is disastrous. His whole career has coincided with the shrinking of Ohio's middle class. My career is synonymous with increasing the size of Cincinnati's middle class. And so we have to get our ideas out and our record. And I'm the only candidate in this race that can literally say my growth record is better than Ohio's. And I believe if we're going to win Ohio as Democrats, we have to credibly offer people ideas that are new and different. A dividend's new, leaning into marijuana, infrastructure's new, summer school for kids who lost learning. These are new, fresh ideas, but also have the credibility to deliver it. And the fact is that my city is growing faster than the state of Ohio. And if we're going to fire a Republican in this state, we have to have a candidate whose record is already better to give people hope to make that change and vote Democratic.
And I will ask you the same question. How do you get over this lack of recognition on all four corners of this state?
Well, it's why we traveled to 88 counties and did the 88 county tour, right? We were extremely excited to see everyone. Dayton is a city much like the rest of the state, and it's frankly, it was very relatable to what I hear in my community every day about people being forgotten and ignored. I'm proud of the 225 local elected officials that have endorsed me and are out there talking to their friends and neighbors about this race. And I'm very proud to be endorsed by the best senator in the country, Senator Sherrod Brown. That kind of work, getting people to validate us, is really, really important, and we've had that experience across the state. Now, for the past 3 decades in Ohio, we've had one party in control. And for the past 3 decades, we've also ran a moderate white man for governor of Ohio. We've run someone like John Cranley in 2018, in 2014, and it goes on and on. We have never tried something different as Democrats. We see in other states, when they run women for leadership roles, we do better with women voters. Now, we can try to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result as Democrats. They have a word for that. Or we can try something new and run a woman for governor.
All right, we're going to go now to audience questions. He gets a quick response very quickly because we want to get to questions.
Look, whether either of us are men or women is out of our control. That is true. And so, but what is in our control is how we governed our cities. And the fact is that Cincinnati is doing better than the state of Ohio. And I think it's fair to judge people on what they did have control of, not what they didn't have control of.
Thank you for that. And Carol, go with our first question from an audience member. We're having board members from CMC asking the questions.
This is a question from Marissa Bowers, Gahanna City Councilwoman. Please share how you will support local governments to reinforce local government fund and appropriately protect home rule.
Go ahead. Why don't you start with this?
Well, thanks, Marissa, for your question. And certainly, like I said, I'm really proud of the 225 elected officials, the over 25 mayors across the state that have endorsed me, because they know that I've been a fighter in protecting for home rule and local access to funding. Look, like I said at the beginning, they had this idea 2 decades ago where they were going to cut taxes on the wealthy and big corporations, and suddenly all our communities would be better off. And what we've seen is the communities that can raise property taxes and the communities that can't do without. So it has made Ohio more unequal. So as governor, we got to make sure they pay their fair share. Like, I just want them to pay what people who work pay. That's it. Just closing the lobbyist loophole, $1 billion, making sure we can get our communities get the services they need. Now, this is very personal to me as the mayor of Dayton. We cut accidental overdose deaths by half. We invested over $1 billion into our downtown from private equity and private investment. We've built thousands of new jobs. But who wasn't with us? The state of Ohio. And I see that across the state. Local leaders doing their level best to try to move their community with no help from the governor. We deserve better, and as the next governor, I will fight for local communities.
Same question.
Oh, absolutely. We will defend home rule, and Teresa and I will fully fund the local government fund, which I believe is promised under the Ohio Constitution. In fact, Governor Gilligan from Cincinnati helped expand the income tax on explicit promise that it would be shared back with local communities. But the point I want to make on this, and this is so important if we're going to win as Democrats, is that 80% of local government funding, especially in small rural townships, counties, is police and fire. And Mike DeWine and John Kasich have defunded local government for the last 12 years. They defunded the police. They have made our cities and communities less safe. And by signing permitless carry, which the police said was dangerous, they have declared open season on the cops. And I'm tired, as a Democrat, of being characterized as soft on law enforcement. That is BS. They have attacked the police and fire of our state over and over again. And this is exactly why the firefighters have endorsed our campaign statewide, and it is why we can take this fight to the Republicans and win.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Carol McGuire, a member of the program committee. This is a question that was posed from one of our online listeners. Jennifer Parsons asks, and this is for both candidates, by the way, what would you do as governor to strengthen the public health systems that were so politicized during the pandemic, and to empower state and local health departments to make Ohio a healthier state?
And we'll start with you, Mr. Cranley.
Teresa and I will fully fund public health in this state. We all had the experience of leading our cities and through COVID. It was one of the most difficult things. One of my best friends lost both of his parents to COVID. The loss is still stinging all of us. We as a country and as a state were clearly underprepared. Public health has been defunded across this country and the state for decades. Cincinnati has a 100-year-old history of being unique in having its own health centers, its own health department. We employ doctors and nurses and a full public health professional team. However, even us, we were better prepared than most cities. We were still underprepared. And so we will have a permanent investment in PPEs. We'll have a permanent investment in building a professional inspection team. We will have a professional contact tracing team. We were nowhere near ready for the contact tracing that was needed, the whole country. And this is, it's like you wouldn't build a state or a city without police and fire. You can't build a world that's interconnected without true public health professionals. And so Teresa and I will make sure that our budget fully invests in the kinds of infrastructure that we need for the next pandemic, because we all know there's going to be another pandemic. We'll have caches of PPEs, and we'll have professionals ready to do the best they can in the next pandemic.
And we're going to move on to you.
Yeah, so I think what we saw during the public health crisis in Ohio was an amazing director of public health in Amy Acton. And when she was pushed out by, when she was pushed out by Mike DeWine, again, he fell and did none of the work to protect and really work with public health, right? It was about what was politically expedient, what did the radicals in his party want, not what we needed for our state and what we needed to keep our communities safe. Now look, when Mike DeWine fell down, local communities had to step up. Dayton was the first city to put a mask mandate in place when he was too afraid to do it. And we did that because I listened to public health. And when the public health doctors say you need to do it, you do it. That's the kind of work that we need. We need a leader that will listen and then will support the actions of the experts. I'm proud of what we've done in Dayton during that time, and proud of the communities that followed us, that led in the face of the fact that Mike DeWine was too weak to stand up to extremists in his party yet again.
We have come to the end of the program, and by agreement, each candidate gets 1 minute to make a final closing statement. We are going to proceed in alphabetical order. So, Mr. Cranley, please make your 1 minute closing statement.
Ohio needs a comeback. As I travel the state, there are too many communities who have seen their wages fall. And we Democrats, in order to win, have to have a candidate with new, fresh ideas and the record of delivering results. The fact is that Cincinnati is the only city in Ohio to make a comeback, and that's what the rest of the state needs. And Teresa and I are going to hit the ground running from the north and the south, executive, legislator, with a plan to build the middle class, to guarantee jobs that pay $60,000, to get high-speed Wi-Fi and clean energy, to legalize marijuana, and to provide income, all in a context of fully funding K through 12 education. But at the end of the day, it's the choice that we have in 2 weeks is who is best to beat Mike DeWine. And because we have a record that outpaces the state, we believe that we are the best choice, and we ask for your vote.
And a final closing statement, please, from Dan Whaley.
Well, thank you, Columbus Metro Club, for this great discussion and discourse. I think this election is pretty simple. For the past 3 decades, we've had the same guys in charge. They've gotten richer. Ohio families have fallen further and further behind. Ohio deserves better. As mayor of Dayton, I tackled some of the toughest challenges, and each time, my community came out stronger. We did it by focusing on solutions, not petty egos or partisan politics. Frankly, we could use a little bit of that in the Columbus State House as well. As governor, I'll work to fight to make sure folks' pay goes up, their bills go down, and we actually have a state government that works for all of us. That means raising the wage for everyone, including raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, investing in the new technologies like renewable energy, and making sure we invest in small business. At the same time, we got to get bills down, making sure our prescription drug costs go down for our seniors, making sure we stop the price gouging that goes on with oil companies right now, making sure that we get property taxes under control by funding our local communities. I'm asking for your vote on May 3rd because I believe we need a fighter from the working class that is willing to fight for every community in this state that has working class folks. Please consider the Whaley Stevens ticket when you vote on or before May 3rd. Thank you.
I want to thank both of them, and the audience listened to me and didn't the whole time except for Brad. But now will you please join me in thanking both of these candidates?
So I hope everyone found today's forum as educational as I did. Please join us next Wednesday at the CMC as we present Good Health is About More Than Medicine. Thank you to today's sponsor, Hannah News Service, and today's partners, the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus and NBC4. Thank you to our online virtual patrons and to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation, and for our presenting live stream partner in the Columbus Dispatch and NBC4i. And special appreciation to all our speakers today, John Cranley, Nan Whaley, and our lovely host, Colleen Marshall. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you for joining us today and with this conversation. Thank you.